morning or both, and you just stay at home, you don't have to
every
say,
week.
Uh-huh. But we did, our son is at college and in Santa Cruz, so we lit the
Oh,
candles, remotely every day. And then,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
so that was pretty
"Hmm."
cool.
Rob went to Santa Cruz.
UC Santa Cruz,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Many years ago.
Banana slug.
That's right.
Banana slug,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Yeah, our son's just closing in on his graduation.
Oh, wow.
Has he still been living in Santa Cruz?
I don't think so, but he hasn't said. So
That
I really
means
don't
he's
know.
not in your bedroom, right?
No, we would love for him to live at home and remain totally dependent on us. It's been our failure in that he hasn't
I
felt the
have a
need to do that.
friend who lives in Oakland, and her daughter probably is only a sophomore at UC Santa Cruz, and she's been living at home the last, ever since the lockdown.
Really, wow. Yeah, my
Yeah,
son, he got with like 6 or 7 other Santa Cruz students, they got a house in the town
nice,
Oh,
share.
oh,
And
nice.
yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, so he's really enjoyed that. And and
Hmm.
now that vaccination is ramping up, we've been able to see him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Rob, I have a question since you went to Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
My dear cousin on my dad's side and her husband both taught at Santa Cruz in the psychology department. Um, and let me think of, okay, I have to think of her name because it's not, of course, my dad's name, it's her husband's name. It was David and, oh, wow. Give me a second. But you might have, were you ever, but you were, wait, as an undergraduate, did you do any psychology?
No, I was sociology. I did sociology.
So yeah, you might have encountered these people. They were the couple became world famous. That was their 15 minutes of fame for taking on a very, very sad situation. I think it was in the fifth, well, it might have been
Paulina,
60s.
Paulina, I honestly really think that we should probably get started
Oh,
because
so are
we
there
don't have
people?
that much time. Yeah, everybody's on.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
so
I thought we were still waiting.
no, we're
Okay.
recording. So anyway, um, it's already 5 after. So sometimes the technology takes a couple of minutes for everybody to get on and to ramp up. But I wanted to welcome everybody to the Erev Lag BaOmer, which means that it's the evening of the day of Lag BaOmer, which is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, of the 49 days. And it happens to be a special day. It's usually a period of mourning and sadness and personal reflection, but the Lag BaOmer is the day that you can celebrate, you can get married. So it's a special day, and that's why we have a special guest. And I want to do one tiny little reading before we get started from the Kahila Sefirat HaOmer, which they published in 2017, about week 5, day 5. Today is the 33rd day of the Omer, which is 4 weeks and 5 days. So there are different qualities. So the quality of Hod, which is the week that we're in, is submission. So Hod of Hod, it means submission within submission. So how much more submissive can you get? But anyway, so that's the quality of the day. And I'll just read a little bit, and then I'll introduce our lovely guest for today. So today, the day of Hod, in Hod, is also Lag BaOmer, literally the 33rd day of the Omer. There are many legends and celebratory customs that have grown up around this day, which stands out among the 49 days of counting. One tradition is that this is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a student of the sage Rabbi Akiva. According to legend, Rabbi Shimon was the author of the Zohar, the Kabbalistic text that is the heart of the work of the Sfirot. Today takes us deeply as we can possibly go into the quality of submission, of humility in the face of what is. And the power of this day is made even more profound by its connection to Rabbi Shimon, a holy ancestor whose guidance we can call upon as we dare to venture into deeper waters. So before I introduce Josh, or there you are, the screen moves around. Before I introduce you, I wanted to talk about one public figure who I am a very big fan of, who is a really great example of someone who understands how to submit. And then what he taught me is that if you submit and you can do that, a lot of times you benefit. It's not a bad thing to submit. And the person I'm talking about, of course, is Bernie Sanders. Now, how much did this man, he tried to run for president twice, he didn't make it, he gracefully submitted, then he tried his next thing, and he tried, and he tried, and he tried, and now he's the chairman of the budget committee. Yay, go Bernie! So I think he's a great example of somebody who submits and succeeds. And with that, I would like to turn the talk over to our wonderful guest. It's a resplendent day, and we have our resplendent guest, Josh Kornbluth.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was hearing, Ellie, I was hearing some sort of swooshing. I don't know if other people heard it, but there's sort of a swooshing sound, and I don't know if there's something crossing your microphone.
Papers. I think it sounded like paper shuffling with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, Hannah, I do think the noise is coming from you, even though you were muted. I really do, because every time I would see the moving, I would hear the noise, even
I'm
though
not
you're
sure
muted.
how that could happen. It's just the visual. I mean, I can turn off my visual, but
It started when Susan was logging on. She has 2 different devices on, and it stopped when she's got them all working. And by the way, that person that says Marsha Brooks at the bottom of the screen, that's actually Tree.
Okay. Yeah, and I've been muted the whole time, Kathy, and so it would be physically impossible to be coming.
All right. Well, the swooshing stopped. Maybe it was my papers, but okay.
Let's just acknowledge that it was a miracle and move on. Hi, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I haven't had a chance really in a while to think about Judaism and with respect to the things I care most about in my life. And just a brief introduction to how I got so Jewish. I was, of course, Jewish, as my father would put it, by accident. I was born to 2 Jews, and was born that way, and was a secular, very, very secular Jew, communist. And they had Marx's thing about that religion is the opiate of the masses, and my father would quote, religion is the opiate of the masses. And my father didn't take opium, so it was meant to be a negative thing. And then when I was in my 50s, I met Rabbi Menachem Creditor when he was the rabbi at
the one in Berkeley. Oh,
yeah, the one in University that used to be
yeah. Oh my gosh.
that used to be a liquor store. And
Netivot Shalom.
Netivot Shalom.
Netivot Shalom. And he would mention a funny thing is that the rabbi who preceded him was a recovering alcoholic, and so he would say that these were both places of refuge for him, either before or after it was a liquor store. So I met Rabbi Creditor, and I talked with him, and I was working on a piece that involved having to learn about Martin Buber and the I-thou relationship, and I was told that Rabbi Creditor would be helpful for that. And then I met with him, and I liked him right away. He's a very passionate guy, but then I said, the catch for me is the God stuff. I just have to, that's the thing that I have trouble with, because I don't believe in God. At least I don't believe in God the way I think I'm supposed to believe in God if I believe in God. And so I said to Menachem, what is God to you? And he said to me, God is the collective potential of the human imagination. So that, and I made him repeat it, God is the collective potential of the human imagination. And that blew my mind. I'm just going to get rid of seeing myself, because hide self-view If only all monologues had that at our disposal. That's better. And one of the things that struck me about that is but you do all the things. You keep kosher, you do all the services. You follow all of these rules. You follow all of these rules, and yet you, being Menachem, follow them not because, as I'm understanding it, that some bearded guy in the sky or some supernatural being is going to punish you if you don't. You're doing it, and the thing that you're worshiping, the thing that you pray to, and that you put your hope in, is the collective potential of the human imagination. And that's it, right? And that's it. And then that, to me, opened the door to feeling, well, I felt, well, yeah, that God I'm into, and the language was very similar to how my communist father described God to me once when I asked him, what if there were a God? When I was a kid, I asked my dad, we had just been at the planetarium in New York, and I was filled with awe. And I said, what if there were a God? And my father said, if there were a God, God would be all the people on earth, because all the people together can do anything. They're all powerful. So very, very similar. I hope that's true. And so then I started going to services at Netivot Shalom, and the first thing I walked in, people were talking about various social justice things and I thought, well, geez, Judaism has stolen a lot from my dad, and then it occurred to me that perhaps it was the other way around. And my father, whose parents were nominally religious, and my father very, very anti-religious, but in fact was very religious, and I think in his way, very, very much carrying on. And he was very proud to be Jewish, and not just by showing up late to meetings, but and eating lox and bagels, but just that sense. So that connected for me, and I ended up asking Menachem to bar mitzvah me at the age of 52, when I was 52, which is 4 13-year-old boys in Israel, which is a whole other subject. And but the event itself was really beautiful. And so I had this connection now between this revolution I was raised in, which is this idea that there's supposed to be this socialist revolution, at least, and then a communist revolution. And now I had an element of spirituality to it that seemed really important to me. And a lot of the concepts that came up with Menachem have really stayed with me, including the present. I'll talk about it a little bit, but an absence that allows a presence to flourish. And Ellie, I think this maybe kind of relates to what you were talking about, submitting and submission. And the other thing, which maybe relates to it, to me, that's always been, that's hit me really hard, and that it's been my focus, is on crossing the Sea of Reeds. That experience of the Israelites crossing the Sea of Reeds, where they drown, as far as I can tell, and they die, and then they emerge at the other side, is that both contradictory things are true at the same time. Like that's what happened. I talked to Rabbi, there's a bunch of Kushners, but there's a Kushner who's in San Francisco, who's like really smart.
Rabbi Lawrence Kushner.
Lawrence Kushner. I met with them at a Starbucks, and he's wearing his baseball cap for instead of kippot, and or maybe he had it under it, I don't know. And but he says, and he said that, well, that's what happened. It actually is true. The thing that historically happened, as far as Lawrence is concerned, is that the Israelites went into the Sea of Reeds, and they died, and they drowned, and then they came out on the other side. Like, what's the problem, right? So, and then there's a story, I guess I don't know if it's from the Zohar, but that Menachem told me once about, that a man, wise man walks around and he, in each of his 2 pockets, he has a message. And I'm paraphrasing, but in one pocket is the message, you are everything. You individually are everything. You're infinitely important. And then in his other pocket, he had a message saying, you're a tiny speck in the vast universe. And the idea being that both are true. And carrying both of those notes metaphorically in my pocket, in my 2 pockets, has helped me deal with the almost constant stress of being alive and human, and my confusion about what it is that I'm supposed to do here. So I had this experience with Judaism, and then through some fairly random circumstances, I became a fellow at a brain place at the Global Brain Health Institute, which is based at UCSF, with my mentor, Dr. Bruce Miller there. And so I began learning about, I began learning about how the brain, how to see things through the brain. And as usual, once my father was very convincing that I should lead. He told me I would lead the revolution, and I at some point I had to acknowledge that I had not led and possibly wasn't going to lead a socialist revolution in America myself. But what it turns out I hadn't given up is the idea of a revolution. I know Bernie has used that term a lot himself, but then I was thinking about revolution. I was thinking, well, what is the revolution that I want? And one of the things about my father's religion and my mother's of communism, their ideology was that they got bogged down in believing things they wouldn't, if things that they believed turned out not to be true through experience, through proof, but it contradicted their ideology, they would reject the new facts, right? They would reject them. And I'm speaking in very specifically about their view on the Soviet Union, their views on the Soviet Union, on Joseph Stalin, who they thought was really cool, was a really nice guy. And I don't want a revolution that's gonna end up destroying people. And so what is the kind of revolution I want? But I do want a revolution. I think we need to have something that is, to me, a revolution. And so the thing that I came up with is, I was starting my fellowship in 2017, and I thought of a revolution of empathy. That's the one I wanted. I wanted a revolution that didn't just have anger and hatred and resentment and revenge happening to it, but actually had empathy. And I found this to be very challenging, because I pursued this, and I'll talk a bit about empathy, and then Ellie has asked me to talk a bit about aging and stuff, and so I'll do that in relation to the brain stuff that I've been studying. The empathy circuit was discovered, the actual circuit in the brain that allows us to manifest empathy was discovered through its absence. It was discovered because a certain kind of patient of certain kind of dementia, behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, or BVFTD, that these people typically, unlike with Alzheimer's disease, they didn't lose their memory, they lost their empathy. And when brain scans were done by neurologists comparing these people who had lost their empathy with people who hadn't, with people who were healthy brains, they saw that the difference was that there was this circuit that was literally had gone dark. It was out. And that through its absence, because it wasn't there in the people who didn't have empathy, they knew, well, that's where it must be. That's where this empathy circuit must be. And I got really excited. I'm still excited about the idea that in speaking with my mentor, Bruce Miller, but also with others, especially this brilliant woman, Virginia Sturm, that that the empathy circuit that we all have can actually, we can lose it through disease and maybe through other experiences, but we can also strengthen it. We can strengthen it like a muscle. And I mean, sort of like a muscle. And that kind of blew my mind because, and blows my mind, because the idea being, I'm going to jump around because that's how my mind works, but hopefully end up connecting, you can connect dots for me. It's so hard for me, when I think about empathy, when I try to empathize now, and when I've tried to empathize in the last 4 years, to empathize with people who support Donald Trump, to empathize with, you know, people who are just rich and evil and divide everyone else and make a lot of money, like the Sackler family and all that. But then I also have this feeling that spiritually and politically, I'm called to feel empathy for them. And so this threw me for a couple of years because I feel empathy for those who suffer. I feel empathy for those who struggle. And I feel that that's, to me, from what my little studies of Judaism, very Jewish. But this idea of us and them, which is really important, it's also disabling sometimes to me. And I'll try to describe that more, but probably, I don't know how I'm going to get to ageism from this, but the thing, what we are is that we're in right now. I mean, as you know, we're in a terrible existential battle against fascism and white supremacy and metastasized capitalism, and we're in this thing now, and we have to fight. Like, we have to fight. And so I guess one thing I'm exploring, that maybe as I study Judaism more, maybe I'll get help here, is how I can keep fighting, which I know we must. That's my obligation, to fight for justice. That's my obligation as a Jew. That's my obligation as a Kornbluth, is to fight for justice in the way I can. But to fight for justice, is there a way for me to fight for justice and yet not lose empathy for anybody? Is there a way for me to fight for justice and yet feel that we're all together in this, even those of us who really don't like the idea that we're together in this? So anyhow, those are some things I've been grappling with. One of the subjects that I've been studying is aging versus ageism. I have actually made these videos that are called Citizen Brain, and you can find them at citizenbrain.org. And there are 4 currently. The most recent one is on othering and belonging, and they're like about 10 minutes long. And it's part of my empathy revolution, is I'm trying to spread without, which is hard for me, without talking about my communist childhood at all. I'm trying to spread to as many people as possible this idea that that empathy is the most human thing about us, that it's our superpower. And I had this thing I just want to share. I get comments, usually really nice comments, on Facebook, which I realize is evil, and on YouTube, which I realize is evil, and then on Vimeo, which I think maybe isn't evil. Those are the 3 platforms I'm on. But I get comments, and they're mostly good, but I've gotten a couple of comments on negative comments on Facebook, and one of them was, "This sounds too much like a cult." And it sort of took me aback, because I did this whole video about how we all are one, that everyone belongs, that democracy requires everyone to belong. And the idea that that was a cult really threw me for a loop, because it would be a cult, as I could see it, a cult that involves every single person on earth. And you know, in which case the meaning of a cult, you know, I guess it's sort of, now that I'm thinking about it, we may all be in a cult of some sort. But anyhow, one of the things that's also happened with me, jumping back to limits and absences, is that as I noticed that I got involved with the brain stuff, at the age that my father died. Previously, I've been a volunteer at the Zen Hospice Project, and I got involved in that at the age my father had a stroke. And then it made me think back to just the absence of my father since I was 21 when he died. While terrible, but it happened, and it opened up something. It opened up this world of story, and this world also that made me realize, I think maybe faster than I might have, that I'm connected to other people in this profound way that wasn't solely defined by Marx, Engels, and Lenin. So one of those limitations that I face, that maybe you face too, is the limitation, is the idea of aging, the idea of our being finite, each of us being finite. And it's kind of cruel to be raised by secular parents who immediately said that that was bullshit, that you could live beyond your life, that you just lived and you just, you know, that was it. There's a book I have called The Afterlife. It's by a philosopher. I'm not gonna try to remember his name, because also I read a review of it and it sort of changed my life, but then I tried to read the book and it was impenetrable. So, but the idea of this guy was that he describes a philosopher, and he described right away at the beginning that what he meant by the afterlife is the life of everyone who follows us on earth. Like, so the afterlife is our descendants, our children, just everyone else, everyone who lives and then will live and will live after we're gone. And he suggested, and this philosopher suggested that, which I'm not sure about, but he suggested that we have more empathy, that we actually have more empathy for the people who are as yet unborn than we have for the people in our lives right now. And that's really important. And so these things have been floating around my mind. And then as I've started to explore things like aging and ageism in the context of brain science, I found myself like beginning to address a lot of these issues for me. There just seems to be, I'm going to quote my therapist. I have a really great therapist, psychotherapist. After kissing a lot of frogs in my life, I have this really great psychotherapist, and then he's just when I'm, you know, discovering my authentic self, he's about to retire. So we're racing against time before he retires in July, for me to completely be cured. But one thing that that he said to me, I think it was him, maybe it was me to him. Anyhow, is that we live in delusion necessarily, that we have to live in a certain amount of delusion, because if we actually thought and absorbed and lived with the knowledge that we have, the knowledge not just of death, our own death, but the knowledge of the pain which we have, of others, which we have just a bit of, but if we actually lived with it, I think it would incapacitate us. It would destroy us, at least as I'm thinking about it. And in fact, it turns out that empathy, though generally considered a good thing by neurologists, but too much empathy is also really bad or can be really bad. Here's an example, is that you're a surgeon and you're just crying because of the suffering of this poor person on your operating table because you feel her pain, but you're not able to, you know, help her, right? And I love that idea. For me, the idea of limits, of empathy having a limit. So anyhow, in terms of aging, some science facts. One of the things I found out, which has sort of became the hook of my video, this is amazing. I don't know if you heard about this. There's a study done by a woman at Yale a few years ago, but she found that when people think positively about aging, when they think positively about aging, they live on average 7.5 years longer than people who think negatively about aging. And so that's pretty cool, for one thing, but it also gets at something else too, which is that I feel like, and I may be not alone in this, but that I spend a certain amount of my time and my energy bemoaning the limitations that I have on my experience, and that I will have on my experience and those of my loved ones because of our finiteness. And it seems like there's something about that. If I actually dwell on the negative part of that, then I'll actually have less of this life that I'm making myself somewhat miserable in. And so this idea that I can make myself, the idea that accepting my transience as much as I can, and accepting the transience of the people I love, and then of the other people who I would love if I knew them. Accepting all this transience allows me to have what to me is an infinitely full life for the time that I have the life. So anyhow, think positively about aging. If you think positively about aging, then you live 7.5 years longer on average. One of the distinctions that I learned right away was I didn't actually think of ageism as a big deal before I did my brain research on it. It just seemed like it was not one of the really great isms to fight, you know, like compared to sexism and racism. It seemed like ageism was, you know, it was second level. It wasn't a top-notch ism in terms of fighting. But then as I researched it, one of the things I realized was that, you know, ageism is, in fact, in a sense, it's the universalism. It's the universal prejudice, because it's the only prejudice that all of us, if we live long enough, are subject to, right? Can be subject to. Aging is natural. Like the idea of like aging, of course, is if you're aging, it means you're alive. So that's really great if you're aging. And then this idea of ageism, which is unnatural. It does this really creepy thing with othering, which is that, to me, when I'm afraid of getting older, then I'm othering my future self. I'm prejudiced against the person that I will become or am becoming at every moment. And I think that self-othering, to me, strikes me as something that, and I'm making a mental note to bring it up with my therapist next week, but it just seems really important. It seems really important not to alienate parts of myself from me. So yeah. I learned about the U curve of happiness. I don't know, have you seen the U curve of happiness? It's also very hopeful. It's actually corresponding to my experience now. I'm almost 62. My grandpa lived to 103, so that's how I chart how old, like how many years I have left. So I still have a ways, but I'm still, anyhow, the U curve of happiness is it's literally that people measure happiness in studies in which they measure happiness, and people tend to be happiest at the early part of their lives and at the late part of their lives. It's a U curve. So the sadness is the trough, which is the middle of our lives. And I just find that really cool that science has found a U curve of happiness. It just seems really neat. One of the things that happens with age is we build up wisdom. Not all of us, not all the time, but we build up wisdom. And I've learned that this is another circuit. It's a semantic appraisal network that, to a large extent, the development of this network in our brain allows us, as we get older, to evaluate things better and better, to evaluate whether it's good or bad to do them, whether they are good or bad. We build on our experience, and it allows us to evaluate better. And I've always loved that one of the central brain parts that's involved in wisdom and also in empathy is the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of the brain that, to me, and don't quote me on this, but it's very crucial in evaluating, is there a threat to me? Is there a reward that I might get when I'm confronted with another? So, but the reason that I particularly like amygdala is because it sounds Yiddish. It sounds like, someone is singing a lullaby to little like amygdala, and brings me back to being Joshua for my grandparents. So that's not really scientific, but I feel pretty good about it. So, another good thing, positive thing about aging, and another way to think positively about aging is the grandparent hypothesis. I don't know if you've heard the grandparent hypothesis. I first heard it described as the grandmother hypothesis, which I thought was sexist. But now more as the grandparents. Anyhow, the idea is this, that only human beings, and then a couple kinds of whales live significantly beyond reproductive age. And so, what's the advantage? What's the advantage? And so the hypothesis of the grandparent is the advantage is that you can have 3 generations living together, so that the grandparents can stay with this is a little more challenging during pandemic, but that the grandparents can transmit all of this wisdom and social and intellectual capital to their grandchildren, while the parents are presumably going out and hunting. But passing along cultural knowledge. One of the things that I said it's at a meeting of the senior caucus at the California Democratic Party meeting a couple of years ago. And I just sort of said it because I thought it was cool. And then people kind of flipped out and started jumping up and down about it. It's really simple, but it's just that, people have studied what they call blue zones in the earth, blue zones, which they nickname these places on earth, these little pockets where people live longer, like much longer. Like in the past, I've associated, this with yogurt eating, because I think that was an ad or something. But they looked for what because these blue zones are all over the place. They're in different countries. It's not predictable, right? And it turned out that the thing that seemed to unite everyone, all the blue zones, is that generally speaking, as people got older in these places, they had a sense of purpose. That they had something that they were moving toward that was important. And that's one of the It's one of the two notes. And it seems so hard to, well, a life's work, a life's effort to keep in balance. This idea that each of us is miraculous, but then balance that, as I don't believe Donald Trump has learned to do, with the idea that none of us is everything. That's, Ellie, when you get back to submission and submitting, that obviously there's a very strong connotation in that word, which is releases really negative thoughts about what women have traditionally, historically been told to do, or are currently being told to do by half of our country and a lot of the world, and people of color and older people and younger people. And it's really interesting to me, again, that, there's a thing that is both positive and necessary, which is, I think, a kind of submission, a giving in, a letting down of one's walls, of one's guard against our oneness and against how full our hearts really are. And that's an important thing to submit to. And then it's a really bad thing to submit when someone is trying to take away your agency. And my experience, I'm on Twitter a lot, and my experience on Twitter is that that nuance isn't there in Twitter. In Twitter tweets very much. You take a term and then you sort of run with it for like super positive or super negative. It occurred to me, that I've sort of come to with studying the brain, and maybe a little of my Jewish studies, is I'm an amateur in both. I'm an amateur Jew, an amateur brain person, but it's kind of become, it's kind of resolved for me in kind of a reverse of the golden rule, as I understand it, which is, as I understand it, the golden rule of being to treat others as you would like to be treated, right? That guy said it while standing on one foot. It's a whole story I remember vaguely from Schultz, but treat others as, but I sort of have this thing of like, I find with a lot of people who are progressive, who've worked for change and struggle, and yet who are sort of self-attacking, like me sometimes, is that there's this sort of reverse golden rule, which is treat yourself as you would like to treat others, and to have this empathy for yourself. And that just seems really important too. It may be like incredibly narcissistic and selfish now that I've articulated it, but so okay. Absence and presence. One of the things that they've learned in the brain studies, which is literally mind-blowing, is that when people get certain kinds of dementia, and dementia is always a matter of losing the functioning in one or more parts of your brain, the communication is cut off, and you lose certain things, right? You lose certain qualities, like in Alzheimer's, you frequently lose your memory, among other things. But then they've been finding in the studies at places, that a place I'm at, like the Memory and Aging Center at UCSF, that people frequently gain things when they have brain disease. People with Alzheimer's, what happens is that many people become more empathetic during the progression of the disease because, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because I'd say it wrong, but essentially the stuff that if someone has been successful at holding back his or her empathy out of a fear that I might evaporate if I empathize, I might lose myself if I am walking in all these other people's shoes, or some sort of reflexive fear like that. But then that fear gets turned off, then you become more empathetic. There's something Bruce Miller studies a lot, which is that people with frontotemporal dementia, which I mentioned, behavioral variant, in which people lose their empathy frequently. Frequently, those people, when they lose their empathy, which involves their frontotemporal lobe and stops working in different parts, but it also, the absence of part of our prefrontal lobe, which is the part, as I understand it, in our brain that tells us, you might want to do this thing now, but really it would be better if you didn't do it now. Like, be better if you do it later. It like has a lot to do with restraint, with self-restraint. That when people lose a certain amount of that, they start painting. People begin painting who have never painted in their lives. They start painting during a stage. They start composing music. And so again, I'm really taken with this idea of how a loss can also be, in some ways, again, how the absence of some part that's always been a part of me can allow for space. I'm just thinking where my mind is going now is I'm just thinking how this might apply to as we come out of the pandemic. That like we've had these limitations, right? Like the way we're talking to each other now, except also you guys have been talking to each other all the time over Zoom. And I've been talking to a lot of family people all the time that in the far-flung world that I haven't been. So actually, I'm a little interested in what happens, what's going to happen. Yeah, it's above my pay grade though to have an answer to it. I don't know how this is connected, but it's in my mind. My mother used to work at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York. And she was hired to be, she's a librarian, and she was hired to be the librarian of photographs, of their photographs. They had all these photographs that people would leave to YIVO or would give to YIVO, of Jewish people. And they weren't cataloged. My mother's a cataloging librarian, put stuff in order, very prefrontal lobe. And but then when she got there, she took the job. When she got there, it turned out that virtually all the photographs that she needed to organize were from the Holocaust. That was this huge uncatalogued mass of pictures that they had at YIVO Institute. And so my mother was confronted with this problem immediately, which is that she couldn't emotionally deal with looking at them. She couldn't look at them, and yet it was her job to catalog them. So how do you catalog them without looking at them when they're pictures? So what she did is she got them to hire somebody, a grad student, who looked at them for her and then described them. And his descriptions became more and more elaborate and more beautiful as he kept doing it. And until eventually, I think it led very naturally to him. His name was Jim Hoberman, or first initial J. Hoberman, becoming a film critic. But I think it was because he was seeing something for someone who couldn't look at something. And yet they both felt it. So I don't know. Empathy is a leap of imagination. It's a leap between the nominal limits of me and the nominal limits of you. making that leap, that jump, that action, and doing it as an action to me seems fundamental to what I'm hoping to experience as a person, as a Jew. And I guess what I'm feeling is I know I'm losing things as I get older. And I've certainly lost, you know, as many of us have, I've lost people that I've loved. But I feel somehow, without being able to prove it or back it up, that by living with these absences, feeling them, not trying not to think about them, or not, by incorporating as much as I can without becoming incapacitating myself, by incorporating what the love that I feel for people, that it creates the resilience, or helps create the resilience, or the spring, if you will, that allows me to leap, to empathize. So I want to thank whoever's responsible for us not staying young. And I thank all of you for letting me go on like this.
Thank you so much, Josh. There were so many teachings in your presentation. And I think personally, I feel like a new door has opened in a couple of doors in both categories of empathy and thinking about aging. So that was perfect. You hit the nail on the head. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah. I'm not sure what your time schedule is. We might have time for one or two questions, or do you just want to wrap it up? It doesn't really matter to me.
Well, the president is trying to reach me now,
Oh.
but I feel like I just have to assert the power of my citizenship in putting that off. So
Josh,
I'm happy to stay on. I'm happy to stay on.
I hate to interrupt, but I just really want to ask you this, because humor and longevity are very connected, and there have been many studies on that. And I wanted to ask you, if someone, a lot of elders suffer tremendously from loneliness and other issues. We know that, and I'm a gerontologist, and I've been in the field for 35 years, and I have done a lot with brain work. My question is to you, do you think someone can acquire a sense of humor and think funny like you do? Would you talk a little bit about that? Because it's something that can really make a difference in people's lives. I grew up serious, and I just would like to have some words from you on that.
And that's probably why you were able, unlike me, to get college degrees. So you're more focused.
No,
I don't know. It seems like everyone. There's a guy, Joel Kramer, who works. He's a neurologist at the Memory Nation Center, where I am, and I am virtually right now, and he works with on healthy aging, what he calls healthy aging, and with healthy aging cohorts. And he has said specifically that he feels that a sense of humor is a kind of resilience that, to him, seems to connect people, seems to be common among people who age in a healthy way. That it makes humor is, and I dread ever reading anything about humor, but just because it scares me. But humor is, to me, in some way, it's one of the versions of holding those two opposing paradoxical thoughts, those two paradoxical things together. That's the humor is, at least a lot to me, is this humor of, well, we're this, but bizarrely, we're also that. And so I haven't done the academic work to back any of this up, but anyhow, I think it's really important.
That could be why there are so many Jewish comedians,
Right, right.
Yeah.
We hold a lot. I think we have time for 2 more questions, and I see that Tree. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Josh, so much. I love your humor and your movies and the bar mitzvah. And I'm in contact with Rabbi Menachem, and that was great. And I saw your performance at I forget where the place where you and he did a thing of
the Ashby stage in Berkeley.
Right. So 2 things, just for your information, I read today that there's a woman in either Kansas or Nebraska that is 114 years old, and she's hoping about, the end of COVID, whatever. It seems like she's got all her marbles, and I don't know about the rest of her health, but my question is, so I don't see you at Nativot, or maybe you're there when I'm not there. And also, so I was wondering if you are interested in attending a different religious service, maybe a Quaker one or Jewish renewal like Kehillah or Chochmat Halev, or the Aquarian Minyan, of course.
Yeah, those are really, really easy, simple questions to answer, Trigo Stuber, but I'm going to try. So let's see. Why am I not at shul? Which is a question. I realize you're not asking it like that, but
no, you don't have to be anywhere except where you want to be. It's your choice.
But it is interesting to me. I was for a couple of years when Menachem was here in Berkeley, and I could meet him for coffee and ask him, barrage him with questions. I was going to services. I even fasted on Yom Kippur, even after I found out that it's supposed to include coffee.
Everybody's got their own level of,
yeah. But I just felt like I finally understood Job at that point. But it was really cool for me to go to these services, but I never, especially after Menachem left, it never became incorporated in me. It wasn't a thing. I mean, I loved it while it happened, but it wasn't. I think maybe if like the rest of my family did it or something, maybe, but it wasn't. It seemed really beautiful. I love, like, one of the things I love the most now is just textual analysis, like Talmudic analysis, and I just think it's so beautiful. And again, a limitation. The Jews didn't have many options for reading or studying, and so they studied this one book really hard, and then
over and over.
Yeah, and then turned it into these beautiful stories and extra stories, things like that. But yeah, it didn't stick with me. Yeah. I also, and this is something I'm not gonna, it's sort of an incendiary, well, it's not sort of, but Menachem and I disagreed on certain fundamental ways about the state of Israel and its relationship to Palestinians. And Menachem's view, very nuanced, very full of love for everybody, but ultimately, to me, tribal. And that's a problem. That became a problem for me.
Should go over to Kehillah, because that's they're on the opposite of the equation. Go ahead.
So yeah, I've been and David Cooper is a hero of mine, and I took a class on Jewish history with David Cooper, and you can imagine how great that is. I'm looking at there's the Kehillah thing.
For the counting of the Omer, they did a book in 2017.
Cool.
But I also, I don't want to interrupt, but I don't want somebody to say that you should, because I think that shoulds are not healthy. In our lives, that
I don't think any. Yeah. No, I take your point. I don't think anyone has been telling me I should, but sort of asking me essentially, what is it that I am in contact with, or that I might be in contact with, to continue this journey? continue this quest, which is to a large extent spiritual. And all I can say is I've become friends with a bunch of rabbis and a bunch of non-rabbis, and one really terrific retired cantor. But I've sort of, it's not like, I don't want to say a phase because it's still part of me, but I feel like it was another experience that I had, like the experience of now being immersed for several years in the world of brain science and brain health, in which the problems that were established for me when I was very young, like that new ways of looking at them were given to me. New ways of looking at myself and looking at them. So, I mean, my parents didn't really go to Communist Party meetings either. They didn't go to anything. So, I think that's the tradition I was raised in is not going to meetings that much.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I also feel that personally, my congregation is kind of my family. So that's one of the reasons that I go. And I can fully understand if people have full lives with families and they're on their own spiritual path, that's perfectly fine too. You know, we're all in our place. Rob.
Yeah,
Rob.
hi. So Josh, I've done some work in the criminal justice system, and there's, this classification of psychopath, sociopath, and people who seem not to feel empathy. And you were talking about that certain form of dementia where they can actually trace it to certain deficiencies in the brain. So do you know if they've done anything parallel to that with people who are classified as psychopaths or sociopaths?
I believe that they have. There isn't someone who specializes in that in the group that I hang with, but there's a woman who does a lot of work with criminals and people who've been imprisoned, and both with what in their brain and in their brain development might have led to them becoming criminals, and then the huge effects of imprisonment on brain health, with very specifically the issue of solitary confinement, which is torture. Yeah. It's anti-human torture. But I don't know. It does seem to be, I'm sort of interested in it. I mean, some of my favorite books that I've read have had psychopaths in them. And maybe even some of them have been written by psychopaths. I'm not sure. I don't want to read more biographies anymore of the writers that I admire, but yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, to me, really a fascinating question is like, if you're born wired, missing certain things or wired in a different way, and then if you're born, but then also, of course, if you have experiences, if you have these horrible abusive experiences that then also turn off your ability to empathize, your ability or desire to be able to feel pain or to survive the feeling of pain, that, people have been born this way, and then they've been wired this way. So why are they being punished?
Right.
Right. And
yeah, it's a very good question.
and I think the thing that makes me hopeful, the thing I sort of try to keep in mind is this idea that, yes, we are born wired a certain way, where each of us, as I understand, is born with a certain, like almost a thermostat that controls how much alone we can be without going nuts, without getting depressed, how isolated or lonely that we can, before we get lonely. And also perhaps in levels of empathy and how readily we empathize with other people. We're born wired with those ways, and then we have the environment. We have our families, and then we have the environment, and then the environment writ large with what pollution does in lead in water and in paint and all of these things that have impacted on people's brains, right? negatively. But the thing I cling to is that we can, to a certain extent, rewire ourselves positively as a conscious act, right? That's the thing, maybe of all the things, that's the revelation of my 4 years with the brain people, is that we can rewire ourselves. It actually, like, it's science that we can do this thing. And so the idea is to figure out how to build up our empathy circuits and how to try to rewire ourselves to become better, better people. So, and then the big sort of analogy I made when I started working at the Memory and Aging Center at the Global Brain Health Institute, sort of the same thing, is that because I started my fellowship at the same time as Donald Trump started his presidency, that I immediately started to think, when I was looking at brain maps, brain scans, I had just been looking at all of these maps of the United States and red states and blue states, political maps. And I got this sense that the country, our whole society, our whole political system has dementia. And has a very, very damaged empathy circuit. So that's what I'm working on. I'm trying to build up my own, but then also our collective empathy circuits.
So I think we have one more question from Ami, and then I want to, thank you so much, Josh, for your time. And so Ami, go for it.
Thank you so much, Josh. We're big fans, and my wife's also read Diapers. When you just said the notion of rewiring is possible, it just hit me that that's completely in line with the Jewish concept of teshuvah, of returning, that we do every high holiday and should be doing all year round. So much of what you said has so much resonance in Jewish concepts and Jewish teachings that you probably are aware of, or you say you're not. And this last one just knocked me over, because it's a rethinking of the whole concept of returning to not the same path, but a new path, to Teshuvah, of the rewiring. So much is possible. So thank you for all your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Ami. That's one of the things that really hit me with force when I started going to shul was, because I'd never gone to any things like that, was how it was based on cycles. And the cycles had to do with death, and then with rebirth, or with birth and death, and with weakening and strengthening, and then the idea that up on the stage, I forget the word for it in a temple, the thing that's with the stuff that's up there.
The bima.
What? Bima, yeah. Thank you. That it was evocative in this case. I mean, they're all different bimas I've seen, But anyhow, this one was evocative of what felt to me like ancient Egypt, right? Or of a sort of that time. And I felt that it was this, and of course, there's this very old language that, because these were conservative Jews, they insisted on speaking for the whole service. But it was also sort of connecting us to the past and then to the future, and that I saw the power of it. And then also, Ami, what you remind me of, and it's true what you're saying, your insight is right, that I think more of the Jewish studies than I let on. And one of the things that had occurred to me to want to add to what I said before is that in my experience, there are lessons from Judaism by really smart people that unlock questions for me in a way that nothing else and no one else has unlocked it. I'm not saying there aren't, I'm sure there are other ways of it, but that, and part of it is this sense of, I'm a Jew, and the Jews are my people. And these are some brilliant ways that Jews have come up with dealing with the problems of suffering, death, slavery. So thank you, Ami, for bringing that up. So I guess, yeah, what I want to, I don't rule out that I getting involved again. But right now, between my bicycling and my brain work, my time is pretty full.
But you are involved, whether you know it.
I'm involved, and Menachem is in New York now, and occasionally we connect, and it's like a jolt to me. It's like
in all the good work you're doing now, you are involved in a very Jewish way, in my opinion. Thank you. I hope that's the case. I believe it's the case. It's certainly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to live as best I can a good Jewish life.
Well, I hope we can do unto others, which maybe is you, what you have done for us. And I think this was just resplendent and very touching and deep. And I don't want to keep you too long. And I'm sure we could go on for hours, but I like to kind of wrap things up. This is recorded. Other people who couldn't make it will be able to see it again. But I think we're all taking away a lot of wonderful teachings, stories, ideas, new directions.
So thank you. And can I ask you if it's possible to send me a file with the comments in the chat, because I haven't been able to keep track of them.
I will.
During this. Great.
And then I'll send you the link to this recording also.
Okay.
And is there anything that you want us to, I know you did the, what was the brain injury, citizenbrain.org. Is there any other way that we could follow you?
Yes. What an excellent question. My website is joshkornbluth.com, and it has a bunch of stuff on it. And then one of the things it has on it is my upcoming gigs. And it's confusing, but I premiered a one-man show this past fall over Zoom that was meant to be at the Ashby stage. And it's also called Citizen Brain. So the 10-minute videos are called Citizen Brain. And this 75-minute monologue, autobiographical monologue, is also called Citizen Brain. So that's just the way it is. And I'm performing it again live on Zoom on Mother's Day weekend at the Marsh. And so, and I'm really into this show. I'm really into it. I felt like it really helped me to address the times that we're in my own way. So anyhow, you can find out more about that either on my website or at themarsh.org. And I guess lastly, if you ever have any desire to play bingo on Zoom, for a year now at the Marsh, it was just supposed to be for one Friday, but now it's every Friday at 7. For an hour, I host a bingo game here from my living room. And it's free. It's at themarsh.org, and you can see it. And then one thing that it's evolved into that is its own thing now is that I received from a cousin of mine a bunch of letters that I'd never seen that my father wrote to his own parents when he was a young man working for voting rights in Georgia in 1948 and 49. A whole bunch of these letters, which for various emotional reasons I couldn't bear to open and read. And so what it's turned out to happen is that in the last part of each bingo night on Friday, I open a new letter and read it for the first time that my father wrote to his parents from Georgia. So it's sort of like bingo plus a letter from my father.
Mm.
Very
A
nice.
new dimension to bingo.
Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, oops. Oh, okay. What happened to Josh? So oh, there we are. Okay. Okay. Well, I think that we're going to call it a night. And I think now we can become followers of Josh, and you're an honorary member of Minyan. I'm the membership chair, so I'm extending that to you. Temporary chair. So thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for being here. I have a lovely warm feeling, and we're going to have a resplendent Lag BaOmer tomorrow, thanks to your teachings. In part.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care,
Well,
everybody.
good seeing everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye. Great presentation, Josh. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Josh.